This is your daily scripture for February 17th. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. Honored to be with you today as we continue on in the book of Leviticus chapters 4 and 5. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel, saying, If anyone sins unintentionally in any of the Lord's commandments about things not to be done, and does any one of them, if it is the anointed priest who sins, thus bringing guilt on the people, then he shall offer for the sin that he has committed a bull from the herd without blemish to the Lord for a sin offering. He shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord, and lay his hand on the head of the bull, and kill the bull before the Lord. And the anointed priest shall take some of the blood of the bull, and bring it into the tent of meeting. And the priest shall dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle part of the blood 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil of the sanctuary. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense before the Lord, that is in the tent of meeting, and all the rest of the blood of the bull he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, that is, at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And all the fat of the bull of the sin offering he shall remove from it, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys with the fat that is on them at the loins, and the long lobe of the liver that he shall remove with the kidneys, just as these are taken from the ox of the sacrifice of the peace offerings. And the priest shall burn them on the altar of burnt offering. But the skin of the bull, and all of its flesh, with its head, its legs, its entrails, and its dung, all the rest of the bull, he shall carry outside the camp to a clean place, to the ash heap, and shall burn it up on a fire of wood. On the ash heap it shall be burned up. If the whole congregation of Israel sins unintentionally, and the thing is hidden from the eyes of the assembly, and they do any one of the things that by the Lord's commandments ought not to be done, and they realize their guilt, when the sin which they have committed becomes known, the assembly shall offer a bull from the herd for a sin offering, and bring it in front of the tent of meeting. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull before the Lord, and the bull shall be killed before the Lord. Then the anointed priest shall bring some of the blood of the bull into the tent of meeting, and the priest shall dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil. And he shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar that is in the tent of meeting before the Lord. And the rest of the blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, that is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And all its fat he shall take from it, and burn on the altar. Thus he shall do with the bull. As he did with the bull of the sin offering, so shall he do with this. And the priest shall make atonement for them, and they shall be forgiven. And he shall carry the bull outside the camp, and burn it up as he burned the first bull. It is the sin offering for the assembly. When a leader sins, doing unintentionally any one of all the things that by the commandment of the Lord his God ought not to be done, and realizes his guilt, or the sin which he has committed is made known to him, he shall bring as his offering a goat, a male without blemish, and shall lay his hand on the head of the goat, and kill it in the place where they kill the burnt offering before the Lord. It is a sin offering. Then the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and put it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering, and pour out the rest of its blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering. And all its fat he shall burn on the altar, like the fat of the sacrifice of peace offerings. So the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin, and he shall be forgiven. If any one of the common people sins unintentionally in doing any one of the things that by the Lord's commandments ought not to be done, and realizes his guilt, or the sin which he has committed is made known to him, he shall bring for his offering a goat, a female without blemish, for his sin which he has committed. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering, and kill the sin offering in the place of burnt offering. And the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger, and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour out all the rest of its blood at the base of the altar. And all its fat he shall remove, as the fat is removed from the peace offerings. And the priest shall burn it on the altar for a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be forgiven. If he brings a lamb as his offering for a sin offering, he shall bring a female without blemish, and lay his hand on the head of the sin offering, and kill it for a sin offering, in the place where they kill the burnt offering. Then the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour out all the rest of its blood at the base of the altar. And all its fat he shall remove, as the fat of the lamb is removed from the sacrifice of peace offerings, and the priest shall burn it on the altar, on top of the Lord's food offerings. And the priest shall make atonement for him for the sin which he has committed, and he shall be forgiven. If anyone sins in that he hears a public adjuration to testify, and though he is a witness, whether he has seen or come to know the matter, yet does not speak, he shall bear his iniquity. Or if anyone touches an unclean thing, whether a carcass of an unclean wild animal, or a carcass of unclean livestock, or a carcass of unclean swarming things, and it is hidden from him, and he has become unclean, and he realizes his guilt, or if he touches human uncleanness, of whatever sort the uncleanness may be, with which one becomes unclean, and it is hidden from him, when he comes to know it and realizes his guilt, or if anyone utters with his lips a rash oath to do evil or to do good, any sort of rash oath that people swear, and it is hidden from him, when he comes to know it, and he realizes his guilt in any of these, when he realizes his guilt in any of these and confesses the sin he has committed, he shall bring to the Lord as his compensation for the sin that he has committed a female from the flock, a lamb or a goat, for a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin. But if he cannot afford a lamb, then he shall bring to the Lord as his compensation for the sin that he has committed 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. He shall bring them to the priest, who shall offer first the one for the sin offering. He shall wring its head from its neck, but shall not sever it completely. And he shall sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering on the side of the altar, while the rest of the blood shall be drained out at the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. Then he shall offer the second for a burnt offering according to the rule. And the priest shall make atonement for him for the sin that he has committed, and he shall be forgiven. But if he cannot afford 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, then he shall bring as his offering for the sin that he has committed 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour for a sin offering. He shall put no oil on it, and shall put no frankincense on it, for it is a sin offering. And he shall bring it to the priest, and the priest shall take a handful of it as its memorial portion, and burn this on the altar, on the Lord's food offerings. It is a sin offering. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him for the sin which he has committed in any one of these things, and he shall be forgiven. And the remainder shall be for the priest, as in the grain offering. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, If anyone commits a breach of faith and sins unintentionally in any of the holy things of the Lord, he shall bring to the Lord as his compensation a ram without blemish out of the flock, valued in silver shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, for a guilt offering. He shall also make restitution from what he has done amiss in the holy thing, and shall add 1/5 to it, and give it to the priest. And the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering, and he shall be forgiven. If anyone sins doing any of the things that by the Lord's commandments ought not to be done, though he did not know it, then realizes his guilt, he shall bear his iniquity. He shall bring to the priest a ram without blemish out of the flock, or its equivalent, for a guilt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for him for the mistake that he made unintentionally, and he shall be forgiven. It is a guilt offering. He has indeed incurred guilt before the Lord. Mark 2:13 through 3:6. He went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, Follow me. And he rose and followed him. As he reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and people came and said to him, Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? And Jesus said to them, Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins. One Sabbath he was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priests to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him." And he said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. Psalm 36, to the choirmaster of David, the servant of the Lord. Transgression speaks to the wicked, deep in his heart. There is no fear of God before his eyes. For he flatters himself in his own eyes, that his iniquity cannot be found out and hated. The words of his mouth are trouble and deceit. He has ceased to act wisely and do good. He plots trouble while on his bed. He sets himself in a way that is not good. He does not reject evil. Your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the mountains of God. Your judgments are like the great deep. Man and beast you save, O Lord. How precious is your steadfast love, O God! The children of mankind take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light do we see light. O continue your steadfast love to those who know you, and your righteousness to the upright of heart. Let not the foot of arrogance come upon me, nor the hand of the wicked drive me away. There the evildoers lie fallen. They are thrust down, unable to rise. Proverbs 10, 1 and 2. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. I was thinking about all the things in Exodus that would be sin and sinful, and how many times a day these sacrifices would have to go. And again, it's pointing to Jesus. This needs to be done once and for all. This type of sacrifice, on and on and on. Just, we step out of line all the time. There probably, honestly, if all the population were to sacrifice as commanded by God in the Old Testament, there probably wouldn't be enough lambs and goats and bulls to cover all our sin on a daily basis. And so that's why we need a Savior. And speaking of, we're going to talk about Mark, and for those, I think I said this way back in January, way back, a month and a half ago, but it seems like way back. I use Matthew Henry's commentary mostly, Barclay's on occasion. But I wanted to talk about, as I was reading today, we've read about this instance of the man with the withered hand in the synagogue, and whether or not it might be a trap. You know, they're trying to see if he's going to heal so they can try to accuse him of doing something unlawful on the Sabbath. But we don't have this version, this last part where he says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And I thought we could talk about that today. And again, using Matthew Henry's commentary to help us with this. This is and God talked about it in Exodus when he's talking to the Israelites. You know, it's a sacred and divine institution. It is made so in order that we can rest, and so it's set aside for us, and for us to enjoy and to embrace, and not, it's not to be a burden or a hard task. It's not there to be an imposition. And so what we have to be careful of is not to make it an imposition, and not to make it something that God didn't intend it to be, right? it's interesting that God, man was made the day before the Sabbath, right? Man, and when we read the creation in Genesis, the creation story in Genesis, man is created on the sixth day. And so man was made for God and for God's honor and for God's service in God's kingdom. So God didn't make man to serve the Sabbath, the day set aside. And we're not to be tied up in all this legality and legalism that the Pharisees and some other denominations want to make it. Right? It's there to support us. It's to our advantage that we have this day of rest. I think it's there, and as Matthew Henry says, it's there for us so that we can rest. We need a day of rest. We have, and God said, which is really interesting, we have all these countries talking about shortening work weeks. God says the work week is 6 days. It's not 5, 4, 3. It's 6 in biblical terms. Now, what that means, technically, from God's perspective and a spiritual perspective, one can argue that. But, God says the 6 days you work, the seventh you rest. And so God provides that we may be taking advantage of this day to rest our bodies. It says in Deuteronomy that thy manservant and maidservant may rest. And so the Sabbath there is intended for, at least in part, for our physical recuperation, right? To kind of recharge the batteries. And so, as Matthew Henry says, it's for edification, not destruction. And not only is it for us physically, it's also for us spiritually. It's a day for holy work, for worship, for communion with God, for praise and thanksgiving. Time to put the worldly business aside so that we can come and draw closer to God. We talked, or we didn't talk about it, but we've read that Jesus went often by himself, dark 30, and went and prayed to spend time with God. And not that we should only do this on the Sabbath, but particularly, I think, on the Sabbath, spend our time, whether it's public or private, we spend it focused on God and focusing on the things of his kingdom. And so not only to recharge our bodies, but to recharge our souls. I've talked about this in prior years. Alistair Begg talks about where he grew up in Scotland. There, they didn't have a church on every corner. His church was, where he grew up, was probably the only church for miles and miles. And so his family, cousins and uncles and all that, would walk to town, sometimes 6, 7, 8 miles, walk to town, go to the morning service, come to the house, and there would be no radio, no reading of anything that wasn't scriptural or about God. And this would start the night before. He said his mother would start putting stuff away at like 10 o'clock on Saturday. Anything that was not of God and of the kingdom, that was not, you can call sacred, I guess, would be put away. And so they would do this. They would attend the morning church service. They would come home and have lunch and spend time with family and discuss scripture and things of God's kingdom. And then they would have the evening service, and then the families would separate till the following week. And that was their Sabbath. And I thought, what a cool thing. What a great thing to try. We've done it, and not necessarily on purpose. There was one or two Sundays here in our house where we've not had the TV on or that kind of thing. We've just kind of had praise music going. It was very peaceful and very restful. Not watching football, not watching soccer, not doing any work, just kind of, doing things around the house maybe a little bit, but being enveloped by the things of the kingdom of God. And I think that's what God had in mind. I mean, this is the brilliance and the genius of who God is. These things he institutes are for our benefit. And it's to our benefit if we observe them in the way he intends. Right? We should be about the work of the kingdom on the Sabbath, because it will recharge the batteries, as I said earlier, physically and spiritually. And so I think, we ask ourselves, then why? What's the point of this? And when we get to the end of the Sabbath day, say, okay, has this been truly a Sabbath, and am I the better for it? and not to make these things that God puts in place religious burdens, not to, like what the Pharisees do, right? Jesus talks about, and I think I brought this up like 6 times already this year, but not putting burdens on the backs of the people and not lifting a hand then to help them carry them. We need to be careful that we don't do this to ourselves as well and make these things of God something that they're not intended to be, which is these burdens and weights to carry, bring us down and all that kind of stuff. And so I think for us, we just have to be careful and take advantage of the things that God gives us for our betterment and be thankful for them. Hope you're having a great day. God willing, we'll talk again tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.